Hi everyone, welcome to History on Trial. This is Dr. Tracey McCarthy. A massive number of European clans, tribes, families, collectives, nations left Europe over the past 1,000 years and descended into West Africa. And this was often done by force. And what happened was these individuals went what was known as native. So they went native. And that means that they either merged with indigenous people in those spaces and then took on their identities, or displaced those individuals and then took on their identities, or coexisted. One of the things that also took place is that when the individuals descended from Europe, they also were heavily involved in the transatlantic slave trade and the trans-Saharan slave trade. And so some of what was going on was you had people doing things in the names of others. And so often there was a perception that one group of people might be doing something, and it was often another group of people doing something in the name of those people. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at a number of European families, tribes, clans coming out of Europe that went into West Africa. And even though they left Europe, they maintained the family name. And this is often obscured because when people are in a particular space, there's an automatic assumption that the name that the people have in that space is indigenous to that space, that it's native to that space. And so often when you hear names that you think are quote unquote African names because someone possesses the name that happens to be in Africa, what happens is there's a mistake made, because the name, even though the person who possesses it is in Africa, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's where the name came from or that's where that family came from. And you're going to see this in a number of instances. Now, this does not include all of the instances, but we're going to look at a few that are very, very important. And there are many implications based upon this dynamic. And not only do some of these names trace back to Europe or Eurasia, you also will see that some of these names trace back to Scripture. A number of authors have pointed out this dynamic whereby the individuals who were cast out of Europe or who left Europe voluntarily, they planted themselves on the west coast of Africa centuries ago. And when they integrated with the people, over time, the descendants became indistinguishable from the native people who were originally there. And so they married in and continued to marry in and marry in and marry in to the point where you really can't distinguish the quote unquote Black Europeans from the individuals who were indigenous to the land and in those spaces originally. Now, we cannot cover all of the groups, but we're going to look at some select names, some select family names, tribal names, ethnic groups. We've already talked about the Akan quite a bit, but we're going to revisit them. So we're going to look at the name Ghana. We're going to look at Akan. We're going to look at the Ashanti people, Fanti, the Dogon. We're going to look at Ogoun, Anza, and Bali. One of the things that keeps up confusion in terms of tracing ancestry and understanding history is this process whereby people are attaching phenotype to continent. And it is important to remember that a continent is not a color. And if you look around even now, you will see that on every single continent, that there is diversity, and that diversity has pretty much existed for a very long period of time. And so no matter where you go, you see people who look different, you see people who have different cultures, you see people who have different ancestral narratives, you see people who have different genetic histories. And so just keep that in mind as we are talking about this, because it is very difficult for many people to even envision that there were darker people in Europe or that there were lighter people in Africa before now. We're going to start off with Ghana. What's interesting about the history of many of the groups in Africa is that there is confusion about their origins, not just confusion by outsiders, but confusion by the individuals who are in the cultures, in the communities, in the tribes, in the clans, in the nations. And this is also the case with Ghana. And so what this author is talking about is this issue of not knowing where they came from. Now, it may be hard for many people in the West to believe that the people in the East are unclear about where they came from, but this dynamic is not just something that goes on in the Americas. This is also something that goes on in Africa, and not just the West Coast of Africa. And so different groups have different oral traditions about where they came from, or where the name came from for the tribe, the ethnic group, the clan. And we are going to look now at some earlier histories related to these names. And we're going to start with Ghana. This author points out that prior to colonialism, the actual name for present Ghana is still not known. We're going to reveal that though. And so one of the things that the author also points out is that there is a relationship clearly between Ghana and the Ashanti. The author also points out this issue with the letter H. And one of the things that happens when you have these transliterations, you'll see letters added that are often unnecessary. So you could still have the sound without that letter being added, and Ghana is one of those instances. And so you can see down below, it talks about the switch of the name from Ghana, just G-A-N-A, to G-H-A-N-A. And we're going to see who the Ghana people were when it was just G-A-N-A. And here the author expounds on this discussion related to this H, and indicated that rarely will anyone find in African languages an H following certain consonants. And so they spell out these consonants. And also there is a notation down at the bottom that Ghana might originally be Ghana, G-A-N-A, and of course that would be G-A-N-A. You might recall from our earlier discussions related to India that Ghana is a very old name. It's a very ancient name, and this is a very ancient clan name. Now, this ancient clan name is found in India, but this clan name is also found in Europe. And this clan name is coming out of France. And so it was first found in Burgundy. And as you can see here, not only is Ghana spelled with the G-A-N-A and then that added G-H-A-N-A, you can see in terms of variations, in terms of spelling, that there are a number of spellings. And because these spellings are so varied, it may be very difficult for people to automatically recognize that Ghana is in the middle of these spellings. And so you see a Y added to the end of Ghana, then you see a DE added before Ghana and then a Y. You see a DU added before Ghana and then a Y. So you see a variety of ways of obscuring Ghana and obscuring the fact that Ghana is a tribe out of Europe, and that the mystery about where Ghana came from is resolved when you see the history of Ghana in India, and you also see this more recent history of Ghana, this Ghana kingdom, the Ghana people coming right out of Europe. And here you can see some migration patterns of the Ghana people. You see a very early migration pattern, and this one is very, very telling. You see Ghana settlers in the United States in the 17th century, and the first thing you see is Richard Ghana. And where does 19-year-old Richard Ghana go to in 1634? Barbados. The Ghana clan continues to migrate into the Americas and into spaces where there are climates and people that may be more conducive to the Ghana people. So you see migration into New Orleans and migration into Texas in the 1800s. And here you see the Ghana people going into Nova Scotia in the 1700s, and you see the Ghana motto down below, no beak, no claws. This timing with going into Nova Scotia is consistent with some Jacobite dynamics also. Ashan is the root of Ashanti, and we're going to look at the origins of the Ashanti people and how they migrated into West Africa. And here's a continuation in terms of understanding the name Ashan. And you can see very clearly that this root is not from Africa. This is an Anglo-Saxon cultural name. It's a very ancient one. This name is found in the Domesday Book. This name, Ashan, the root of Ashanti, is warrior of the spear. Again, when you start to look at these variations of the names, you can see how it would get lost over time and across cultures. And if you were looking for your own ancestors, you've probably seen this dynamic where the name has been spelled different across time. And so you see here that Ashan is also related to Ashman and Ashman and Ashman and Asman. Now, many of the Ashanti made their way into the Americas and in West Africa based upon a response to political and religious strife in Britain. And you can see here with one of the variations of the name that a George Ashman ended up in Barbados in 1654. We've already talked about the Hebrew roots of the name Akan, and so we have Ashan also with apparent Hebrew roots. And so you can see here that this is a place in Judah and later in Simeon. And here's a little bit more specificity. You can see it says the same as Ashan, Ashan, a place in Palestine. And we're just going to quickly revisit Akan. And here you see, just as with the Ashan, the Akan, and they are related, the root for that family's history is England and Scotland. And you can see here that the ancestors of the Akan surname lived in Yorkshire. And so this surname is also associated with the parish of Ogoun. And again, if you look down below, you see that this family's name is also in the Domesday Book. The surname is also transliterated as Akum. And again, here you can see a number of variations of that name, Akan, Akom, Akom, Akum. And if you look down below, you can see that the Akan settled in the United States very early, 1712. And as we make our way around Europe and Africa, we are at the Fanti. When most people think about the Fanti people, they think about the people of southern Ghana. However, you're going to see now that this Fanti name, tribe, clan, that it comes from another space outside of West Africa. The Fanti have a very interesting history in terms of name origin. The Fanti come out of Venice, Italy. And you see here a notation about the origins of the Fanti family. It says in 1231, the Fantuzzi family moved to the city and were immediately recognized as nobility and were given seats in the Senate. And you can see here the spelling variations are enormous for this family name. And so it would be very easy to kind of get lost in terms of this family name. And so you see the traditional spellings with the F-A-N-T-I and F-A-N-T-E, but then you see where both the I and E are left off, and then you see all sorts of other spellings here, and you see a D-E-L in front of Fanti. You also see Fantino and Fantin and Fantinelli, and so there are many ways of spelling this particular name, this particular family, this particular clan, tribal group, nation. And the first West African name we're going to be looking at under this context is Anza. And as you can see here, that the Anza history goes back to Spain, and this derives from the Basque. And so you can see that this is a very old name, that even though you find the name in Africa, that doesn't mean that that's where that name originated. And so you can see here some earlier roots coming out of Spain. And this is also consistent with a Moorish identity. And here you can see some spelling variations for this name, including Ansar and Ansara. And here you have some more interesting dynamics related to the name Anza. And you can see that it's most prevalent in Pakistan, even though it has its highest density in Ghana. And so what this should lead one to do is to start thinking about the correlations between Pakistan and Ghana and why there would be people with this same tribal, family, national name in these two discrete places. And here you have immigration and transportation information related to the Fanti. And so you can see this late migration out of Italy into the United States through Ellis Island. And again, this looks like that Scottish-Irish migration dynamic where you have some individuals descending into Africa, some individuals coming west, and then some individuals going to other points east. Now we're going to look at the Dogon. And here you see the Dogon coming out of Ireland. This is an ancient Gaelic family name, and you can see that it is related to the word dub, which means black. And here you see the Dogon surname was first found in County Clare, and they were located on the west coast of Ireland in the province of Munster. And this family is a direct descendant. They are traceable to Fergus More, and that is Fergus the Great. And here's some information on the spelling variations of Dogon. You can see Dugan and Dugan and Odugan and Dugon and Dugon and Dugan and Dugan. And there are many more spelling variations. But one thing that is important to note is that retention of that root, meaning dark, meaning black. Many of the people of the Dogon family, they migrated into the Americas, and they did so often in the 1700s. And so you can see the variations of the names. There were not clear-cut spelling rules quite a while ago, and so you had people spelling the same name in a variety of ways. And so you can see it spelled with an E, with an I, with an A. So you see all of these variations. But again, they were coming in, and this is consistent with when they would be coming in the 1700s there. Now, what is really interesting historically in terms of the Dogon is the relationship between the Dogon people and the scripture. And you see this relationship, it's a pretty tight one, related to the word Dogon, the history of the Dogon, and their spiritual traditions. And so you can see here this spelling of Dogon with Dagon with an A, so Dagon. And you can see over to the left-hand side that Dagon is defined as a god and an idol of the Philistines. When you look down, you see the root, which is the DAG root. And we're going to see how this is related to the present day Dogon that you know of. And you see here that this root for Dagon is fish, a fish. That is the root meaning of that name. And even though you have this distinction with the A and the O in terms of the different ways to spell that name, you see here again this correlation with fish. And so the sacred symbol of the Dogon, you see that the very important symbol in terms of the Dogon religion is the fish. And we are going to now look at a couple of names that are related to some famous people. And one name coming out of Ghana and one name coming out of Nigeria. And again, we are going to trace these family names right back to Europe. We're going to start off with the name Ogoun. Now, this name is very important because it is a part of the spiritual tradition of some of the people in Nigeria. And so many people would have no idea that there is any connection to Europe with respect to this name, but you're going to see that there is definitely a connection. And here you have the Ogoun history and family here. And you're going to see that there are a number of ways to spell Ogoun in terms of translations. This name is coming out of Scotland and Ireland. And you can see that the first people to use the name Ogoun were in Strathclyde, and they were Britons who lived on the Scottish-English borderlands. And you can see here some more information about the early origins of the Ogoun family. And you can see that this name was found in Lanarkshire. You can also see some really interesting information about this name and its relationship to the word name Adam. And so meaning Adam and kin. And so that's definitely an important notation. And you'll see that there are a number of groups of people in West Africa that have clan names, family names, tribal names that relate to the name Adam. Now, what's really interesting is when you see the spelling variation of Ogoun, because most people would not think about Ogoun being related to Adam as in first man, and also these other names as transliteration. So you see also that it is related to Atkins and Akan. And so that's very important notation. And here you can see some movement of the Ogoun people under the name Akan, moving into the Americas in the 1800s there. And you can also see here the Ogoun family motto, and you can see that the motto translates to strength and vigilance. Now we're going to look at some census and immigration data, and you're going to see how this name, Ogoun, has traveled far and wide. So these family members have not only gone into West Africa, but you can see that these family members can be found in Turkey. And you see here Mehmet Ogoun identified as a white male, even though, again, this name is primarily thought of as being related to Africa, Nigeria in particular, and the Yoruba very specifically. And here you see an additional passenger crew list for Asmi Ogoun, and you can see also this relationship to Turkey, and this is coming in through Ellis Island. And here we have another Ogoun family member, this person boarding at Helsinki, Finland. Here you have two additional family members, tribe members, nation members of the Ogoun. And here we have a Sigismund Ogoun, and this individual migrated to the United States in 1985. This is an additional migration record for another individual, Joe Ogoun, and this individual also is identified as white, and this individual is coming out of Russia. Again, we have an additional person, August Ogoun, and this individual is identifying racially as white and also located in a Polish cemetery. Now we're going to look at the Bawali name, and you're going to also see that the Bawali name, although it is considered an African name, that it is related to a family clan in Europe. One dynamic that makes it sometimes difficult to automatically recognize that a person is looking at a European surname or family name or tribal name in Africa is that the name is rooted in the Gaelic. And when a name is rooted in the Gaelic, sometimes it's not very easy to see that this is another translation of that particular name. And so you can see here that it identifies this name again coming out of Lanarkshire. So this also goes along with the Ogoun surname. What's really interesting about the Bawali surname is that one of the translations is Arnbuckle and Arbuckle. And here you see a variety of spelling variations for that name. And again, they do not look like they are automatically related, but this is what takes place often when you have Gaelic surnames. Here we have a marriage license record for the surname Bawali. This individual was in New Orleans, Louisiana, and this individual came out of Syria. And this person with this surname Bawali coming from this family lineage, this person is identifying as white. Now we can see additional information coming from census records. Now this is very interesting because now you can actually visually see individuals who are perhaps identifying as quote unquote white and perhaps identifying as quote unquote black, but again possessing the same family name. Now one individual at the top has a name that one would stereotypically assume is a name coming out of Africa, specifically out of Nigeria. The other person has a name, first name, that stereotypically would be coming out of the Americas. What you can see, however, is that both individuals were located in California during the time that these pictures were taken for the yearbook. Again, same family name, but what looks like a significant divergence in terms of phenotype and in terms of direction with respect to where the family ended up. As we wrap this up, we have seen now very clearly that the situation in West Africa is very, very complicated. That means that the situation in the Americas is equally complicated because these histories are tied together. And these histories are also tied together in terms of the transatlantic slave trade and the trans-Saharan slave trade. And many individuals that were presumed to be indigenous African are clearly not from indigenous African families. These individuals appear to be historically, culturally, ancestrally coming out of Europe. perhaps coming out of Eurasia in some instances, but definitely more recently coming out of Europe and taking on this identity of African. And this has complicated so many things. And so this is one of the reasons why, in terms of coming to some sort of reconciliation, coming to some sort of reparative or restorative justice, it is going to require a truth commission. And we've been talking about this for a while, and this determination still stands that a truth commission is necessary in order to disentangle all of this. So clearly you have individuals who descended into West Africa from a variety of places in Europe. And those individuals participated in many ways in the colonization of Africa. And so that's a part of all of that confusion that goes on in Africa even today with respect to the colonizing. And if you'll notice that the colonization followed the individuals. And so you had individuals who were coming out of France. They would go to a place in Africa, and that part of Africa would be colonized by France. Same thing going on with the United Kingdom and other parts of Europe. And so again, many people in Africa are presumably indigenous to Africa, but many people in Africa who are presumed to be indigenous to Africa are not indigenous to Africa and are in fact more recently tied to Europe. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care. See you soon.